Welcome to the Get Detoxinated podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Root, author of Sauna Detoxification Using Niacin, following the recommended protocol of Dr. David E. Root, and co-developer of the Detoxination protocol, a comprehensive method for removing heavy metals, toxic chemicals, and mycotoxins using niacin exercise and sauna therapy. This show features guests with expertise in environmental toxicity, saunas, binders, and related health and wellness strategies, with a special focus on practical recovery tools for people facing chronic toxicant-related illnesses. Today, Dr. Scott Schroeder rejoins me for part 2 of our conversation on metal toxicity, galvanism, and implant-related illness. In this episode, we shift from the problem to solution, covering safer alternatives to metal implants, the role of immune testing like MELISA, and practical ways to support the body when it's reacting to internal electrical or toxic stress. If you watched part 1, this episode will give you tools, insights, and new hope. Hey Scott, thanks for rejoining me for this continued part 2 episode, because there was so much more information that I realized that we really needed to cover. So I'd like to go ahead and get started by asking you, when somebody's going to have to go under surgery for a metal implant or an implant in general, but what if you know ahead of time that they've got some kind of allergy like nickel or something? What do you have to do then?
Well, being a surgeon, I was kind of limited as far as the different materials I had to choose from. Namely, stainless steel was our main one. As time went on, then titanium started coming into play, and stainless steel in general is 14 to 16% nickel, whereas titanium has the alloys are a base of titanium, aluminum, and vanadium, but also then some of the studies have shown there's even traces amount of nickel in the vast majority of these implants, the titanium implants. Even according to the Haleb study, even pure titanium still can have a trace amount of 0.013 or 0.0 something of nickel still in the implants. And so but I have to educate my patient. If they have a nickel allergy, I'll say, okay, well, we don't want to use stainless steel, but we'll go ahead and we'll use titanium, with the realization we may or may not be seeing, a symptom with it, and sometimes we don't. And if we do, then in my cases, I was able to get I wasn't doing total ankle joints, so almost all of my cases I could get the metal out. And then when they did start having some symptoms, I would have to educate them through that whole process. To say, okay, well, we'll swelling. That's what I can see with this. Okay, increased discomfort. We'll plan on getting this out. And sometimes I had to push it up. Usually, I'd like to wait 4 months, plus or minus. But sometimes, if they showed bone healing, I would take them out at 3 months, as long as the bone was healed. And it was like dramatic, when I'd get them out, just as far as swelling, pain, and the localized area, and it's just such relief. So that's how I address that.
Okay, so let me ask you this then. If both stainless steel and titanium have multiple metals in them, it sounds like they can create their own galvanism from within.
There is, and I've asked the corrosion engineers that question, and apparently my understanding, and I still have questions for them, is that when you have an alloy like that, they kind of join together, and so they kind of act as a unit. My understanding, there can be some micro type of galvanic pairs or couplings that can occur. And in talking to another corrosion engineer, which potentially means within the alloy itself. But still, I don't know all as far as that goes. I'm learning and asking questions as we go. So.
Yeah, as an electrical engineering technician, I do recall, though, you mentioned that a dielectric would need to be involved. So if there's an alloy or, the stainless steel has nickel and on all that, there's nothing in between it. So they're basically touching anyway, right?
They are. And, great question. And I don't know the full answer. I've been told a couple different things right now. So I think, really at this point, my concern has been, especially like if we have like stainless steel touching titanium, a stainless steel alloy touching titanium alloy, and then the reactions between that. And then my concern is, even if they're, like we talked about last time, if there's an electrolyte between the two, and then getting a battery reaction. My gut feeling and what I believe I'm seeing in patients is yes. We put, like a patient of mine where I had metal stainless steel in the foot, she had titanium in the back and significant pain in the back, especially after she got a titanium hip or knee, one of the two. And I thought it was a knee, and then her back pain was worse. And then I removed the stainless steel and from the foot, and all of her back pain went away.
It's incredible.
I mean, all of her back pain went away, and I was seeing her for many years after that, and all the pain stayed away. So I believe there's a reaction between these metals somehow, even though they're not touchy.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that would make more sense. I mean, with the electrolyte in between, then they can conduct a voltage or a current with a voltage behind it. So anyway, yeah, that was actually a pretty interesting point to make, though, because I didn't realize that stainless steel had anything else in it. So
yeah, molybdenum and chromium, iron, and nickel, are the main things in it.
Okay.
Sure.
Good to know.
Yep. Right. And then we kind of look at the surgeons, and then some of these big surgeries like total knees and hips, and which are some of the greatest surgeries for improving quality of life going. Okay. And so the majority of all these do very well. Patients do very well with this. So what we're talking about is going to be a percentage, of people that are reacting to this. So, and we don't know who we are a lot of times. And that's what we're going to kind of talk about a little bit later when we get into some of the metal allergy testing and that type of thing. But and then even the surgeons, they don't know how a patient's going to react to the metals. I think the biggest thing is informed consent, and just consenting your patient with, hey, we can react. We don't know how you're going to react to these metals, and so if you do have a reaction, then we'll have to figure it out from there. And sometimes we have to replace an implant if we're having issues. I just think we need to be honest with our patients and tell them and have good informed consent about some of this. And and then we have to ask the questions. So, as surgeons, any surgeon that's going to be putting metal in the patient, we have to ask them about their metal allergies and really go into detail, especially types of implants that are going to be placed on a permanent basis. Like the total, ideally permanent base without having to replace them later. And then that's where
like
those cases.
Wife.
What's that?
I said, like my wife with her knee replacement, she's not going to be able to do anything about those.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can, but it's a pain,
Yeah.
to have to go in and replace. And really what a number of people were presenting, and a number of the professors and everything when I presented the FDA, they were bringing up the point, why don't we just test people beforehand?
Yeah.
For metal allergies. And that is 100% true in my mind. I mean, if I was to have a family member that was going to go in and have a total knee or hip, would I want them tested? Absolutely. You want them tested. You want to know what they're allergic to or not going in. Now, it doesn't mean they may not develop a reaction later on, which they still might, but I think that all needs to be explained by the surgical team, going into these implants.
Yeah,
this is still develop this type 4 delayed hypersensitivity, reaction, and then they
might want to explain type 4 on that one, because what are the other types?
Well, there's type 1. I mean, there's like an 8 type, like you immediately are reactive to some type of an allergy. Okay, that you were born with this, and so you're going to have a reaction to this. Okay. And so there's the type 4, and there's a number, some variations in there as it goes down. But the type 4 is that you're not allergic to it at the time being, but once it's implanted in your body, then you can develop your body's immune system. An adaptive immune system will then adapt and you'll become allergic to it.
This reminds me so much of that whole tipping point thing that my father was talking about, especially when it comes to MCS or multiple chemical sensitivities. Because when the body is already toxic and you add a new toxin to the mix. In fact, I think this would be a great conversation to have with Dr. Harold Zelliger, to talk more about how different chemicals and metals can react in the body. I mean, he's the expert. We should do a show with him, shouldn't we?
Yep. I think that would be great. Yeah, you just keep going up, and then you're right. You reach a tipping point, and then you're over, and your symptoms just become worse. And I think that's some of these patients that I see that it's hard to get off the couch. They're looking to go, find another way out in life, as far as suicide, that type of thing. I've had to deal with that many, many times. So, but I think it comes down to then consent and really just the doctor and then the patient being aware, and then ask the questions too. And
I think that the doctors need, the doctors need to be aware too, though. That's what I hope we're going to be able to do with these videos, is help educate even the medical world. In fact, my father is looking forward to sending these videos to his medical school, Bowman Gray, and making sure that they're aware of these issues. So.
Right, and that's where I don't think it's not really being taught in the medical training right now, and it really needs to, because it's, especially with how much we're utilizing these implants in patients, we need to really educate the docs, not just the surgeons, but all doctors, because there's a lot of the symptoms we discussed the other day that they're treating with medicines and all this stuff, but the root cause may be just the screw in the wrist or the foot or wherever, that's causing these symptoms, and they're just putting them on different medications, like was shown in the one case, where it really wasn't the root cause. So that's where I think we really should be going as a medical community here with that.
Yeah, and also the patients definitely need to be aware of this, because informed consent really means informed, right?
Right. And so we were kind of talking a little earlier as far as, corrosion of these hardwares. And actually, I was just recently discussing with our corrosion engineer, because what we were seeing in our studies, in our electron microscope studies, is that, like, I had 2 plates in a patient, and the larger plate did not show corrosion underneath it, but the smaller plate did. And I was asking why, and it was a plate we showed in the nurse. And where after 4.5, 5 months, significant corrosion of this plate, but the larger plate didn't show corrosion. So, but he says, well, typically it's the smaller metals, the smaller size and mass metals are the ones that are going to then have more electrical activity and more potential corrosion to develop. So I think that, we have to look at that, and that may be a reason why sometimes with some of the total knees and hips, these are large implants, and potentially why we may not see as much with those type of implants as, like I was, in presenting in my cases the other day, 26.4% or whatever it was of, life-changing symptoms after I removed the metal from the foot or ankle. And so, and maybe it's just that larger mass of an implant potentially is not going to corrode as readily as the smaller ones.
Well, you had mentioned in the last video about the anode and cathode, and I'm wondering if there is a correlation here with why one would be corroding faster than the other, with the way that electrons flow.
Right. Yeah, it's going to be the way the electrons flow, and then the current and all that, and maybe it's electrochemical, in the body somehow it relates to this. And so we're looking at in our corrosion studies, kind of in the body. Doing some of these basically galvanic pairs of the different metals, and then we can then see, okay, which one's going to be more the anode and cathode, and laying that down.
So smaller metals will corrode faster, you've mentioned. And I also remember seeing the titanium striations versus the corrosion in the slide deck you had the last time. And I believe you said that was like a 5-month period in that kind of corrosion period?
Yeah, just 5 months. So that was a plate. One of them was a plate that I put in, and then I took out.
Yeah. Well, then what about things like heavy metals or any smaller metals? How fast do they corrode, or are they already corroded?
Well, it depends. If you're just talking about metal ions that are in there, like gadolinium or gadolinium that are already in there, circulating in the body, or getting stored in fat or bone or what have you. I don't know what size those are. I mean, they're already broken down to the metal ion size. And then in my concern is that then can they then start, and I brought this up actually many years ago in Turkey in a toxicology conference, but once these metal ions are floating through the body, can they now react with other implants or other metal ions that are going, basically circulating throughout the body? And, I mean, I think that's a great question to ask. And then, like I said, I deal with a lot of the dentists and oral surgeons and head and neck surgeons, and that have to basically reconstruct jaw bones after these metals, because over the years a lot of the various metals, including the mercury amalgam, were placed in the teeth, and then we're having some issues, like I say, with the titanium dental implants, with the FDA, with their adverse event reporting, and we have to figure all that out. But so dental metals, then, I mean, I imagine we are going to be having corrosion with those metals, especially in that space, because we're looking at pH changes, pH, lower pH or more acidic, especially when we're dealing with bacteria in the mouth all the time. And so that's going to lower acid and increase hydrogen peroxide levels, and all this is going to increase corrosion. Okay. So could there be, if there's other metals in the body, and that's where we were testing between just, electrically between these dental metals. And so that is definitely a concern, that we can cause increased corrosion of whichever metal,
Right. And then we've got the issue of, excuse me, we got the issue of mercury and gadolinium in the body. And can't those be the bimetals that are in the body that can create galvanism?
That's what we need to, try to find out. And, I would think so. My thought process leads me to, I mean, again, I'm seeing some of these, larger metal implants, react. Why wouldn't the smaller, ionic forms react potentially in the body, and potentially more detrimentally also,
right,
when they're floating around and causing, their own, whether it's the galvanic reaction or leading to a hypersensitivity reaction, or even a toxic reaction.
So even with other metals, or like plates or screws and things like that, am I correct in assuming then the gadolinium ion can count then also as the second metal in the body? It's not just like the mercury vapors or the mercury.
I would certainly think so.
Yeah.
I would certainly think so, since it's a it's a rare earth metal, right?
Right.
So why wouldn't it? Just like the titanium, once that corrodes, where does it go? It's circulating throughout the body.
Yeah,
so
and storing it back.
Things cross the blood-brain barrier, right?
Right.
And same thing with gadolinium, is my understanding, right?
Let's talk about that blood-brain barrier, by the way, because I think it was Dr. Zeliger's work where I learned that the blood-brain barrier is pretty much shot in people who have toxicities. I mean, it's not preventing anything from really getting through it. And in a way, that's actually kind of a good thing for our detox program, because we can then get the metals that are in the brain out, and chemicals. But the thing is that I mean, the blood-brain barrier, I think, is overrated. What do you think?
I don't know. I'm not an expert in that field by any means, and Dr. Zelinger probably knows more than most as far as that goes. So
well, we'll have to ask him in an upcoming podcast, won't we?
yeah, that's right. What I do know, and in another patient, that slide we didn't show just because it was pretty graphic, where I had removed a plate from a patient after it was still 4.5 months or so, and just complete black tissue underneath the plate.
Wow.
Where the bone was, on top of the bone in the periosteum. And I've had many patients like that, and I test that, send it out to pathology. It comes back as titanium particles.
Wow.
So I mean, it was quite significant, So these and I understand you had a patient who had a question about some of this breakdown and corrosion, and so you can see it pretty readily in certain cases, and it's not going to be everybody, and I don't think we understand exactly why, but my personal feeling is the more metals we have in our body, the more potential for interactions, and then we can potentially cause a more rapid corrosion process of one or the other metal.
Yeah, and there's all these different ways, like sensitivity or allergies. You've got the galvanism, and then there's one other. What am I missing?
There's toxicity, or metal ions causing a
Yeah.
toxic. Yeah.
So there's
Toxic.
just all these different ways that the metals in the body are potentially going to cause conditions that people just don't even connect the dots on, and are probably medicated to, disguise the symptoms. So
Right.
yeah, I hope this information is going to resonate with a lot of people. But anyway,
And I guess one more point, it was one of the corrosion engineers actually brought up the same thing even before I even mentioned it to him, about the metals in the body and reacting with each other. He goes, yeah, you're going to have a dental metal reacting to a hip, implant, and then you have another plate or screw someplace else. And he was the one that said, he believed they would react with each other also. Kind of like, and that's before I even said anything to him. So that was kind of okay. We maybe better really look at this. So
right.
Yeah. Yep.
Wasn't it the FDA that you presented their findings on different metals and different symptoms they can cause? So apparently this is a known issue, but what your findings have shown, without a doubt in my mind, is that it's very real that things like galvanism, where there's electrical currents, and those are able to trigger, I'm sure, tremors and paralysis and all these other symptoms, even chronic fatigue syndrome for that matter. So it's apparently known, but somehow it's just not readily discussed in the medical community.
I think people are kind of maybe afraid to discuss it a little bit, and because there haven't been a whole lot of cases like mine where, boom, overnight the pain's gone. And we have, this, case after case after case, and, working with a rheumatology colleague of mine who's, studied at the Mayo Clinic, I'm explaining these cases and having listened to some of these cases, and he goes, that's not allergy. That's not an allergy, that's something different. And, when it just, boom, it's gone like that. And so that's where I believe it's more on the electrical side. And I think it's a combination of everything, potentially, allergy plus electrical, potentially toxicity, and that's what I think we need. We really need more study. We need big universities to come in here. We need NIH funding for this. Or even outside funding of people that are just interested in trying to help, human life here and the human well-being. There's so much we can do. Yeah.
You had mentioned you had mentioned a bit more to me after that video that, let's pick up on testing again.
Okay. Well, some of it, again, we talked about prior to a permanent implant being placed, my recommendation by far, yes, to test that. Ultimately, if anybody's going to have an implant, I think this testing is going to become much more routine as people are seeing what's happening with this and what it can help just in daily, diseases and diagnoses and help. Especially like we talked to think about, the young kids getting braces and then having the stainless steel bar float the rest of their lives. But 16 to 18% of us are allergic to nickel, and then we have a bar potentially we're allergic to, or even will develop a hypersensitivity to later in life. It doesn't make much sense to me. But some of the different testing, and the two that I've used the most have been the MELISA test and the orthopedic analysis test. And the MELISA was based in London, but the labs have been over in Germany and Switzerland, and now they're putting one in Canada. And then the orthopedic analysis is out of Chicago. And the MELISA test, the orthopedic analysis has been a good basic type test. The MELISA is much more specific. It will cover like 35 different metals, and some of these at least plus or minus in that ballpark. And so some of the like tantalum and niobium and some of these others in these newfangled implants, it'll be able to test for, and as well as some of the dental metals like palladium we mentioned the other day, and platinum, and it'll cover those where the orthopedic analysis doesn't at this point in time. And so we'll, we'll see how all of those develop and everything, and hopefully they're more readily available. And and for doctor's offices, I get asked this by doctor's office, how do we go about this? Well, you just contact these companies, and then, have a staff member, get you signed up basically. And then you can, once you do that, you can write prescriptions and just get, prescription forms from them and for your patients. And it's pretty straightforward to be able to get going, because it's not a readily available test. Just go down to your local lab and draw these.
Right. I'm an affiliate with Direct Labs, and I haven't seen any testing like that through their services. But yeah, that's good to know that a doctor's office can just have a staff member set up an account, and then they can script those out.
Yeah, it's not something they have to pay for per se. I mean, it's the patient that, it goes through that. And my goal and what I presented to the FDA is that I believe this should be covered in insurances. This is going to save billions of dollars in my mind for insurance companies and just healthcare in general. Once you know that you're allergic, because if you start putting, products in patients that they're allergic to, I mean, that creates all kinds of other secondary diagnoses and medications and all this. So, yeah. Then another thing then is the patch testing that we discussed, briefly touched on the other day. And so patch testing, that has been kind of a secondary thing, and can be if I'm not, I've used these other tests for, quite many years, and I've been very impressed with how well they have done. And I know what to look for now, so I can know I'm not sure if that's quite right, and then I'll either redo the test,
but isn't there an issue with patch testing though, that is why it should be a secondary because of sensitivities?
Right. It can cause a patient to be hypersensitive, to a metal, because they put all these different metals on. So then it's like when you first have earrings, or first, you get stung by a bee, and then you're not too bad, but then later you're worse, So it can potentially lead to hypersensitivity developing. I don't know the percentage of that. I'm sure the companies do, as far as what percent would, actually get sensitized, with the patch testing. I have seen some patch testing results, though, come back, where, the other test didn't show this metal and this one did. And I believe that, yes, that was true. So you're always going to have some potential false negatives, false positives, with some of these tests. But I think in general, I have been, with the lymphocyte transformation type test, the MELISA test, I've been very impressed with what they've been able to do that's followed my clinical protocol, and then what I've seen in my patients. So that's been very impressive for me.
Yeah, so when people are allergic or have a sensitivity to metals, what alternatives do they have?
Well, there are a number of things coming up, and I did present that well, they're here. A number of them are here. I can go ahead and show you kind of part of a slide deck here. And,
if this is the continuation of the IAOMT presentation in Turkey, that would be good.
Yeah, actually, this was another one that I was presenting to a group of surgeons. Okay. And but I can go ahead. Let me go ahead and share my screen. We can work over to that here. Okay, so here are some of the metal alternatives, coatings, and it's not going to be, probably everything out there at this point in time. But one that I've actually, this rep came by a few years ago, just as I was in my retirement phase, at least from my surgical practice, discussing these osteofiber screws. And basically they're biointegrative screws. And they are, and I was just totally fascinated with this because I've been looking for things, over the years. And basically this, there's a component of this that degrades through hydrolysis, and it leaves behind mineral fibers that are composed of elements, found in natural bones, such as silicon dioxide, sodium oxide, calcium oxide, magnesium oxide, and some others. And so what it does, it actually then, here's the screw, and then it will actually start converting to bone.
Wow.
It's absorbed, and then it leaves behind bone. Now,
incredible.
This was one that I was just going, whoa. And So, and I actually, the rep then got me in touch. I met with the inventor, the CEO, and we discussed things. And I really was pushing him and push his company to develop more and more products. And they're getting there. They're getting, they have some pins. They have a number of different screws. They're getting larger screws now, which is great. They have some tendon anchors, which is good, and staples that have some compression to them just because of the elasticity and that type of thing to it. So that has been very, very nice to see. And I want them, I'd like to see if they can get plates and that type of thing also. Yeah, so we'll see. I'm very, very excited about that company. And with any of these companies, I do not get paid by any company. I never want to be paid by companies. Actually, companies ask me to lecture for them. I said no, because then I become compromised in what I talk about.
Yeah.
So, I just say, no. I have no problem discussing, products that I believe are going to help people, especially with metal allergies and sensitivities and that type of thing, and potentially electrical things too. Like I've tested this osteofiber screw, and I did not see any voltage between that and like titanium or stainless steel. And this next one, this PEC, I'm excited about this also. It's polyether ketone. And there's a company out of Connecticut that has been really, they 3D print these things now. And they have, there's actually, maybe at the end, there's a CBS News clip on a total ankle that the patient had a metal total ankle in. And then he had all these problems. His surgeon was astute. And then, they worked to, I believe, 3D print a PEC type device that he placed in. And his results were, very, very good. So that's exciting, as that's coming up. And that company is Oxford Performance Materials. And they're out of Connecticut. So, and I've talked to them, and I'm pushing them along too to try to develop more things for some of these spinal things and other things that we're having issues with, Sure. So then PEEK is another one that I've used some of these materials, and it's both PEC and PEEK are high performance thermoplastics, and PEEK has been around longer, so but it's been used for tendon anchors and other types of things that they use that for, and potentially in some studies a little more inflammatory than the PEC, but you have to read those studies. And then zirconia or oxinium is a knee, and they've had it in the femoral component. The issue there, the tibial component was still titanium, so that didn't make sense to me, other than they needed it for the stability or flexibility of that. And I don't know if they have something different now with that. But zirconia or oxinium is a ceramic. And then we have some of these carbon fiber plates, but the carbon fiber plates actually, then you still need like titanium screws with them until they come up with something that's, maybe they can use some zirconia screws or something like that potentially. But then here's another, this is a coating, it's a carbon coating. And it's a diamond-like carbon coating that they've coated some of these implants with. Like there was a young boy over in Europe who had a spinal, had scoliosis, and then needed to have he was allergic to nickel and had stainless steel, and they had to pull those out and then coat it with carbon. And then he was able to tolerate that, significantly better. And then this is titanium nitride. It's golden color, and it's this particular company does it. This Paragon 28 company, and these are total taluses, and then they 3D print these, and it's a titanium base, but they coat it with this titanium nitride, which again, it's a ceramic, right? And because there's certain things we have to have done. Okay, you don't have the surgery, or you do. Mm-hmm. And then you try to do the best you possibly can, and you already know you're reactive to metals. And so what are the other options?
Well, I like the one that converts into bone. I think that is just amazing.
I know. Yeah, that is incredible. That's like I said, I glommed onto that one right away.
Yeah. There was a comment you made a while back in one of the videos, and I don't think it was ours, but you mentioned there were different products that contain nickel, and a lot of people are sensitive to nickel. And I think the audience would probably like to know some of the things, because I was blown away when I heard the one, I think you said chocolate.
Yeah, yeah. Yes. So some of the things that are high in nickel, okay, because I will have patients that have no metals in their body, but have similar type symptoms, fibromyalgia symptoms, chronic fatigue, all headaches, all this stuff, and find out they're allergic to nickel, but they have no metals in their body.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, things that are high, chocolate, whole wheat, beans, nuts, seeds, spinach, kale, soy. So some of these can be, high in nickel and cause issues with certain individuals.
Mm-hmm.
So it is it's something you basically Google search. Low nickel diet. That's how you come up with it.
Low nickel diet.
Google search that, and then also look up systemic nickel allergy syndrome. SNAS, S-N-A-S, yeah, S-N-A-S. And and then that, and a lot of people look up that and go, hey, those are my symptoms, that's what I have. And then it guides you through, what to do. So, but that's very important also. Yeah, and I have to constantly educate my patients, re-educate them after I know they're allergic to nickel, because then they get their implants out, they feel so much better, and then later they're not feeling as good. And I go, what have you been eating? Mm-hmm. Well, I really like my chocolate. And I go, well, at least right now you probably can't do that. But the thing is that most people are able to then get back to some of that later on. And it may take a number of years. And so I've noticed that with my own family. Yeah.
Interesting.
That, most of them. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So anyway.
Well, this has been a really good follow-up video. Is there anything more you'd like to add?
I think we're good right now. I mean, it's a lot, it's a lot. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, again, your time is very valuable, and I'm always just amazed by what I learned from you. And again, it's always been a pleasure to talk with you. And thank you again for appearing today. And I'm sure we're going to get the word out about metal allergies, galvanism, and everything. And hopefully the right people are listening.
We'll keep working on it. That's for sure.
Amen. All right.
Thanks, Dad.
My pleasure. Thank you.